And we're back. Hey everyone. Hey Bits and Bytes family. I'm Matt Scott. I'm excited to be back here in the studio. That's right, Joey. It is episode 14. I can't believe we're only on 14, actually. You and I were just talking.
Yeah, it feels like we're in our early 20s. Yes.
We definitely got to graduate to at least 21. Right?
That's right.
I mean,
That's
come
right.
on. But we're excited to be back in the studio here. We got a great guest with us, and we have a returning partner. Thank goodness Adam is joining us. We're super excited. Every time Adam's with us, he offers a ton of value, and I know he's been working a lot with Josh. We're going to introduce everybody here in a second. I'm Matt Scott. I'm one of your co-hosts with my co-host,
Joey Wensler, and it's an absolute honor and privilege to be back at the ByteWorks Bits and Bytes studio right here in Duluth, Georgia, with the one, the only, Josh Stevenson from Nutanix, and our very own Adam Kingery from ByteWorks.
Absolutely. Before we dive in here, Josh, I want to start off a little bit with about yourself. Let me just kind of level set what we're doing here. Bits and Bytes podcast is developed by ByteWorks to share key updates, innovations, trends, best practices in the technology space. So our goal is to create a community to learn and grow from one another, and also to be light and airy, right? So we're not trying to go too deep. We have webinars for that. We have deep dive sessions for that. But we are trying to share best practices and what people are seeing and learning and what we're hearing out there in the marketplace, because chances are, if somebody is facing a challenge or growing in a certain area, many others are experiencing the same thing. So we wanted to create a community to share and grow from one another.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have been paying attention, but there was an acquisition as of late in the billions. Was it $60+ billion acquisition? Broadcom acquiring VMware. And of course, we have an expert in that field who's going to help us understand what this means for categorical verticals, what this can mean for your organization, and perhaps this is a perfect fit for you and yours. So without further ado, welcome to the Bits and Bytes show, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Little background on me, Josh Stevenson, been in the industry about 16 years. Started with Dell, worked there for a little over 12 years, went from across multiple verticals, worked with large healthcare clients, large commercial, large enterprise. Throughout my time there, focused on pre-sales in the virtualization and storage space. I was there during the time when VMware was part of the Dell family, if you will, as well as the EMC acquisition. I did spend a couple of years at Hewlett Packard Enterprise as well. So the bulk of my experience comes from the manufacturer space, selling the hardware, as well as the software and the storage solutions. So worked with customers to do your traditional 3-tier type architectures or hyperconverged or cloud, you name it, anything.
That's great. So you got a great perspective, holistic perspective on the market. So I know as Joey alluded to, there's some transition going on in the industry. And that's 100% what we're trying to get into a little bit, share out there. Where are hypervisors going? We want to explore a little bit on the Broadcom acquisition, your perspective, but also what is the impact into the IT industry overall? What does that mean? I'd love to, with your background that you just shared with us, what are you seeing out there in the marketplace? What's going on? What is this transition?
Sure. So there's a number of kind of things happening at the same time that I think you're making for an interesting mix. Going all the way back to what VMware did in the industry, which was really meaningful and really changed the industry in a very positive way. Being able to software define things, be able to take a workload, make it modular, to migrate it, to achieve availability, to have cloud interoperability. The hypervisor is really sort of the core unit that the data centers are built off of, right? And VMware, again, my early career was learning that solution, learning how it interoperated with different platforms. And it really became this platform technology that was ubiquitous and really helped organizations greatly. And so it was just sort of assumed, right? It was just one of those. There's very few technology vendors out there that ever get to that place, right? Careers were built off of it, lots of really meaningful things that were accomplished, right? And at the same time, you have cloud computing, right? Proliferating, right? You have the hyperscalers, as well as just this concept of SaaS and this concept of interacting with enterprise compute in an on-demand, very easy, user-friendly way. Yeah, so this acquisition came about at an interesting time where pretty much everyone has this technology.
I was going to say very entrenched in conversations that we have with our customers. I would say I don't want to put a percentage, but there's a high percentage that the customer has VMware in their environment because of its capabilities and because, as you said, how it was built and scaled with the capabilities. So
would you say that like hypervisors are like a multilingual operating system of sorts? Because I'm just thinking like back to where things were at before there was virtualization. You would run things bare metal on servers, right? So you would have a physical server with a processor, RAM, and storage, and you would run a type of application on that server.
Right.
And then we got to the point at which there were multiple different types of operating systems out there, right?
Right.
And then not only multiple types of operating systems running on different types of systems to bringing all of those on one platform and being able to run multiple types of operating systems and applications on one system, right?
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a fair characterization, and primarily the ability to standardize, the ability to run an Oracle workload or a SQL workload or this particular nuanced application on the same underlying hardware, be able to replicate that, to be able to snap it, to be able to achieve resiliency at the kind of core unit of the virtual machine, right? That became the way data centers were designed, right? And then you have some edge cases and use cases where maybe not everything was virtualized, but 90+% of the data center is. Again, speaking back to that platform technology, it's a platform technology, and that's hard to achieve. So from the way that the technology works and how it worked in the industry, it was a very, I think, symbolic and meaningful technology. And when you mentioned earlier, just, okay, how is that evolving? So the public cloud really wouldn't exist without the idea of a hypervisor, right? When you're interacting with IaaS, you're creating something in EC2 or Azure, they've invisibly got a hypervisor back there that's essentially chopping up pieces of infrastructure and serving it to you as a virtual machine, right?
Yep.
So the hyperscalers exist because of that technology, and they're built off of that technology as well. And of course, behind that, a distributed system that provides resiliency and performance. What the hypervisor has accomplished is foundational to what the cloud computing has accomplished. What cloud computing has accomplished and has essentially defined the standard for how we interoperate with a workload or how we deploy it. And that isn't necessarily the under the covers guts of the storage and all of the networking, even though that's obviously foundational to it. It's more about, okay, there's a UI that I actually walk through this and it takes 5 minutes to get to deploy a VM. I actually just need the on-demand nature of it, just the observability of it, the ability to log into a portal and see everything and understand it, right? And so having all of that stuff living in software is what enables, and honestly, that's defined the standard for on-prem players, enterprise software companies that don't have those core tenets of their software, right? They're behind, right? And so that's why you've seen the proliferation of public cloud, not because it was cheaper, not because it was there, right? I guess I've been in 16 years or so now. So it's funny, I do a lot of higher education right now, and then state and local government. A lot of them have smaller staffs. They do more with less. They have a generalist, right? And they're asking questions. The other day I had a question, sorry, can you tell me what a hypervisor is?
Yeah.
They just know. And that's okay.
100%, yeah.
Because it's supposed to be invisible. And it's just this thing that I log into and then stuff works underneath it.
Right.
But the evolution that I'm seeing is every product kind of needs to have API interoperability with other products. It needs to have some sort of cloud-like experience. And it also needs to have the ability to have the same modularity to run here or run there.
So I think, and that was a great kind of explanation. I really appreciate that. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of value out of that. One of the things, if I had to take away out of that and just make it super simple, right, is that it's needed. Yeah. It is absolutely, there's a needed capability to be able to do this in the world that we live in today. We're not going to be breaking the news here that Broadcom just acquired VMware, but we have all been around long enough to know that acquisitions are hard, right? And so things happen. It's not as smooth as before you're, looking at the two companies and saying, hey, this is going to be easy. We're going to buy them and incorporate their processes and practices into ours. And so, yeah, it's going to be great. And I would say majority of acquisitions have headwinds and such, which often lead to opportunities, right? For either that company or other companies to say, hey, just because this company wanted to do this and have challenges doesn't mean that you need to be feeling all the pain of it.
Just from the MSP perspective, if you're one of the smaller managed service providers, how is that impacting you?
Yeah, I think from so far my experience about just general impact of this, budgets are, as much as we live in this world of, okay, cloud and on demand and scalability, budgets don't always operate that way. Budgets are like, I get what I get when I get it. And I have to make a decision today based off of what I am guessing about what I'm going to need in 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? And you know you're going to guess wrong. You just don't know how,
no doubt.
right? You know that those are those risks. And so when I'm evaluating a technology, or maybe evaluating continuing to invest in existing technology, or maybe transforming, it's not just the cut and dried, hey, how does this work? Will it fit my needs? Oftentimes that's still the case. It's, hey, will this company's strategy still align with mine in 1 year, right?
Yeah.
Will it still align with my budget in 2 or 3 years?
And my position for now, but also for the future.
Yes,
right? Like,
right. It's a business decision to be able to look back and say, hey, up till now, they've been aligning with me. I've known how to consume. I've known how to invest. And from a support and strategy standpoint, we're still great. That is just, when things like this happens, it calls all that into question.
Yeah. Yeah. That leads me to, I'd love to have you elaborate a little bit on the Nutanix solution, right? Because in the environment that we're in right now, and for all that we have noted around the need for this solution and also the challenges, we've been hearing the question from several customers, and we are a VMware partner. We deploy their solution because of the necessity and because our customers are looking to us to provide the full solution to them. But we're also getting the question now is, what are our alternatives? What can we do? We're in this position. We're faced with some challenges. Can you help us discover some alternatives? And
sure.
And how does Nutanix position into that?
Absolutely. And I'll answer that by rewinding the clock a little bit. So I've been here about 1.5 years. And again, like I said, my background I lived in those same environments, right? And that was my career was very VMware defined, if you will. So when I first came on, knowing, and I actually had spent about 5 years with a large healthcare client who had invested a lot in VMware and actually was doing a lot of transitioning to Nutanix, but they had both. They were big enough to where, large enterprises don't turn on a dime. So they've got traditional storage infrastructure and they're just trying to figure out what workload goes where, right?
Titanic.
Yeah, exactly. And so a lot of my time was spent with them saying, hey, this is where this makes sense. This is where, and so for a lot, I saw Nutanix evolve in that environment and succeed in different ways, so when I came over here, I tried to play neutral on the hypervisor thing. Originally, it was like, yeah, you can run VMware, and which is still true, and that still happens. I was maybe even a little timid about it, right? Where I would have, prior to maybe the very end of last year, a lot of the conversations, the reason why a customer would come to us is like, hey, we feel like you have a pretty compelling different story about the way you do virtualization and the way you do software defined and hyperconverged. So it was sort of a clean, just they're talking to us because of us.
Yep.
Well, what's changed is the 500-pound gorilla has now been acquired. And so now the conversation is a lot more of like, hey, tell us how your hypervisor works. So what it's completely shifted towards hey, how do we interoperate, and maybe shy about even thinking about changing hypervisor to now it's actually the full weight of the situation people, and they were actually, tell me what are the steps to take to shift. And luckily we have, tools and different ways we can get into to make that shift. But hey, we're now actually considering that core building block a different hypervisor. And is that scary? Please tell me it's not scary.
Yeah.
Is that secure? Is it capable? And those are the questions that we're getting into they just have always assumed that this technology is sort of the only way to do it. And now we're learning, hey, it's actually not.
Well, new is always scary, right? When you're used to doing something a certain way and all of a sudden, especially in the environment that we work in, right? In IT, you never want to be the guy that breaks it, right? and so
RGE.
Yeah. So we've seen countless stories of that. But help me out here. Josh, I'm a customer.
Yeah,
I've been using VMware for the last 10 years.
sure.
I'm super comfortable with it, but
Yeah.
I'm faced with looking at alternative solutions.
Yeah.
Tell me about your solution.
Sure. So Nutanix was born in the public cloud. We're a distributed architecture at our core. We started at the storage layer. So the original operating system called Acropolis operating system, it was a software-defined storage. And originally we had a lot of VMware and Citrix workloads that would run on Nutanix. But for the last decade, we've been running our own hypervisor code, which is now our full NCI software code, includes both the hypervisor and the distributed storage architecture, which allows you to have distributed storage. You're able to run any workload anywhere. That's what we do, whether it's a VM, a container, a database, a VDI, right? So we're really trying to abstract away in the concept of the hardware, right, by software defining that, and then making the software-defined data center environment very interoperable with any type of application, whether that's the newer large language model AI type applications to good old-fashioned SQL databases and Windows operating systems.
I'm going to revert back to two things. My first question is, man, we're in a budget constrained environment. Tell me a little bit about what this means for my budget.
Sure. Yeah, typically whenever you've refreshed a storage and virtualization environment, sometimes you buy your storage and then you get your compute and your VMware, and sometimes it's all one thing. Very rarely, though, is that the case. Typically, it's like, oh, we're doing a storage budget this year, and then we refresh, right? What Nutanix and just HCI in general allows you to do is to create more of a linear scalability, be able to buy a chunk at a time, right? Maybe you start small and then you can scale, right? That especially if budget's like, hey, I just have what I have right now, right? And so the other piece is what I've observed for most vSphere customers is they might be running maybe vSphere Standard or vSphere Enterprise Plus, and there's probably, I can count on one hand the amount of core technologies within that they're leveraging and that are really important to them. vMotion, high availability, DRS, just the manageability, vSphere distributed switch, and those cover kind of 80% of what they're using. Every once in a while, you have a customer who's like, yeah, we've deployed NSX, we're using Site Recovery Manager, we're using some vSphere replication in some really advanced ways. Oh, and then maybe we're actually already hyperconverged because we're using vSAN. And there's customers out there as well. But for the most part, customers are, again, that assumed platform technology that everyone is actually now starting to forget about and not realizing that it's actually under the covers, or VMware, DRS, some of these high availability, the ability to just spin up on another VM, and just the encapsulation into a VM. And so from a budgeting perspective, they were right-sized. And then now, because of what's happening in the industry with the way that bundling and packaging and all of that is happening, they're like, wait, I intentionally wasn't designing or investing in those tools before, and now I might have to. For us, I think we have a little bit more tailor fit. Hey, if you're looking for basic functionality, if you're looking for more advanced site-to-site replication in the cloud, we have that as well. And we've had that for a while, and we're really at our culture about choice, and that's from a hardware perspective or a cloud perspective, and as well as from a hypervisor. So I'm going to sit here and unabashedly brag about AHV. It's a great, resilient hypervisor. It is built on KVM, which is the most widely used hypervisor in the world. It's what Amazon Web Services uses for all the cloud scalers. So we're very proud of it. But
what happens if I still want to use my VMware hypervisor?
And you've invested in that, you can absolutely do that, right? You can still run that directly on AOS.
That's huge.
Leverage us as a software defined storage.
What does the learning curve look like? I'm sorry, Adam, you go. But I'm like, man, this new technology, is this a challenge? Like, what does that look like?
You're going the same direction I was going to go. I was going to back up because being in public sector, life cycles of hardware, software, contracts, and people run on a kind of a timeline, right? And we're actually getting into an age where we're seeing a lot of change in headcount going downward in public sector. A lot of people are retiring and younger people are taking over. So architectures are changing at the same time people are changing. So I think you were going that direction, Matt, where it's like, how painful is this going to be and what does it look like? As I've engaged with Josh and we have engaged with customers, Josh is big on helping them understand what this looks like, but then also leveraging tools and demos to help them understand how they would manage it in their world. Everybody's familiar with RV tools and things like that help you understand workloads. Nutanix has a really good tool they call Collector, which is very similar to that, to help clients understand what their workloads look like. Because to Josh's point and your point, Matt, budget is always a big piece of the pie, and you've got to start small. So what we're finding, or what I'm finding out there, is that a lot of customers do want to start small. They want to pick a workload in public sector, and some of the clients Josh and I support. There's Banner, which is a student information system, for example. That workload is roughly about 30 VMs of a particular size. Some are smaller, some are bigger, but it's a good workload to pick as a use case or a point or a proof of value, for example. And then you can always scale it from there. So one of the things that we've done is Josh and our teams have coordinated a bill of materials that we call like a starter bundle or a Banner bundle, if you will. They can start from learning the hypervisor, the deployment, the methodology, the management, the scale of all that, how everything works. And then they can add on to that and scale it as budget allows, as applications allow. But starting with kind of one application is a good way to get people comfortable with something different, right? And then they can scale from there.
Yeah, and I will add on to that. Again, a big part of what I do is demos, boot camps, just sort of showing if anyone has, especially since we're talking about vSphere, VMware, if anyone has any kind of years of experience working in vCenter, right? Again, to the point, the technology, it still works. No one's necessarily saying it. This doesn't. That's really not been the question. So if you've had that experience, the transferability to working with Prism, which is our user interface, that's our management tool, you can go from, typically what happens is a lot of times we'll do a 3 to 4 hour boot camp. We'll have a customer sit down, I'll put hands on, and we'll be deploying virtual machines, storage, setting up networks, and then we have lunch. And at that point, if they're doing anything more advanced, like flow microsegmentation or advanced replication or something like that, we might go a little further. But for everyday operations, anyone with VMware experience can learn really quickly.
That's great. And Joey, for our listeners, we're going to be sharing, when this comes back out, we're going to be sharing a boot camp that Josh doesn't know that we're doing yet. We are definitely about to put that in place, because we're getting a lot of questions, a lot of interest, and what better than getting your hands on it and seeing how it works yourself. So
I just want to throw in something, because Adam, you said something very brilliant about the life cycle, and people are involved in that. And there is a shift, right? Public organizations are lowering their headcount, their budgets are being constricted. So I'm just thinking, if I'm one of these incoming people who's responsible for things that maybe I'm not prepared for, what would be the best first step to understand how this transition is going to impact my organization?
Yeah, great. I would say take a look at, you can check out Nutanix test drives. You Google that, it'll show you, okay, it's a really easy walkthrough to have someone who maybe, let's say you're coming from the Windows admin environment, or maybe you're a CCNA, or maybe you've been an Office 365 admin. I'm seeing early career folks who maybe they came out, most of the computer science degrees coming out of school, they're focused on cybersecurity, right? They're focused on things that are where there's a ton of demand there, right? But a lot of times they'll be tasked with, hey, you're actually now our VMware guy, or you're our virtual guy, you're our SAN guy. What's SAN? What does that stand for? What's iSCSI?
No, I'm supposed to be the cyber guy.
That's right, exactly.
No, you're going to start here.
Yeah, we put the buzzwords in there for your resume so that you can get the job, but congratulations, you're hired. And now there's a bunch of legacy stuff you got to learn. I would say, luckily, at least from our perspective, right, our UI is very easy to learn. There's really, I would say, low friction, quick. We've got, if you go to our test drive, we've got, and then our boot camps, we've got 1 hour material, 30-minute material, 4 hour boot camp, right? And always willing to, a lot of times I do have those meetings where they're like, I've never heard of you, but I'm actually required now to evaluate you. And at that point, we spend 30 minutes or maybe sometimes an hour, and we get really far just explaining, hey, here's what we are, here's what we do, and here's where we play, and here's where we can complement, or honestly, more frequently than not, completely replace. We have a tool called Move. So if you're in a VMware environment today, We've had that tool in it, and it can convert from hypervisor to hypervisor very easily, non-disruptively as well.
So they could train up and they can grow
Absolutely.
into their role. I think that's a very great point that both of you guys bring up. And we're doing this today. We have several customers in which we are working on this solution. You and Adam firsthand are doing that. What are we seeing, guys? Like,
One
how's it
thing I
been?
want to bring up there that we didn't really touch on is building a community. I am big on building communities. I've been doing what I've been doing for about 20 years now, and our best customers and future customers see value in meeting other people just like them that are doing the exact same things.
Learning and growing together. Yeah.
Learning and growing together, being in public sector. A lot of my customers are all facing the same challenges and same opportunities. So the more that we could bring those people together, Josh and I recently went to a directors meeting for a large consortium of educators, and bringing those people together to talk about who's doing what, questions might be asked, creating forums for that, doing Q&As, and then following those up with boot camps and things like that. But keeping people connected is, I think, what makes ByteWorks relationships with folks like Nutanix and our customers
We love to
valuable.
see it. We love to see that, right? When you have that community, that kind of user community where not everyone can be an expert on a few things, and then everyone has where they're coming from, right? When you software define everything, when you quote unquote cloudify everything, all the fundamental principles of IT still apply, right? So you have having someone who's got the networking background, who's got the virtualization background, who's got the database background, right? All of that still applies. It just happens to be managed in one place. So fundamentals of what the best practices are, right? You may not employ this workload. So yeah, and I've appreciated seeing that so far, because he's definitely brought up, hey, this person and this entity over here really knows how to do that. And then the community is great. Let's say working for this company, there's a lot of positive demand. Slack channels saved my rear end so many times. I can't tell you how many times I've had a customer ask me something, and then I want to be the guy who knows everything, but you just can't be.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, I have no idea how to do that.
Yeah.
But then I do, and about 3 minutes later, I'm like, actually, it's this. So, yeah, it's a great community.
Or they inspire us a lot that you might not have been thinking about, and then you can add value to that. So
Absolutely.
it's huge.
Yeah, it sounds crazy because, Josh, you're right. We all want to be experts, but I'd rather be a connector than an expert in many ways. And it's just because we've put two different customers on a call together numerous times and been like, hey, would you mind showing them your AHV environment and how you have things configured and how you've got these different machines set up and stuff like that? Because we're trying to figure out how we do it over here. And sometimes that vulnerability really builds a lot of loyalty for clients, right? And since we are all doing the same types of things together, we all learn from those experiences, rather than, because a lot of times what's written in the data sheets and engineering notes and release notes is a little different than the way that things actually work in real life. So I'm big on bringing customers together that are current users and new users, or kicking the tires, or long-term users, and having discussions around what's working for you and what's not working for you, right? And how do we fix that, right? Because none of this is really set it and forget it. While automation exists in a lot of different arenas, automation isn't fully automated, right? It's not necessarily self-healing. Even self-healing requires some assistance in a lot of ways.
And Adam, you hit the nail on the head, and exactly why we're creating, or have created, the Bits and Bytes podcast, right? Because if somebody's facing a challenge, there's a high probability that somebody else faced a similar challenge. And so being able to cut down that learning curve, being able to get through that challenge faster allows you to grow. So I think that's a very great point. So, hey, we really appreciate you coming here. We appreciate the partnership that we have going on right now. And we're excited about our upcoming boot camp that you just found out about. It's going to be an epic growth year together. So, Josh, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bits and Bytes podcast, episode 14. Adam, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. I know your schedule is jammed. That's a wrap, fellas.
Thanks so much, everybody. Josh Stevenson for Nutanix.
Thank you.